60 seconds of silence. And then the screaming begins. In the mud of the Meuse-Argonne, an entire battalion is erased because a phone call didn't go through. It wasn't just a technical breakdown. It was a tactical suicide. How did a million-man army, backed by the infinite wealth of the American industrial machine, manage to strangle itself with a single tangled copper wire? The generals demanded more steel, more gunpowder, more blood, but they were drowning in their own data. They were the world's most expensive war machine, paralyzed by a dial tone. The only warning came from a woman the War Department treated like a ghost. Silk-gloved precision versus the iron-jawed arrogance of the brass. They laughed at her voice until the laughter stopped and the killing started. Why did the high command ignore the only tactic that could save them? The answer wasn't in the classified vaults, but in the hands of the underdogs. October 1917. Chaumont, France. The air in the American Expeditionary Forces headquarters is thick with the scent of wet wool, stale tobacco, and the ozone of 1,000 telegrams. General John Pershing stands over a massive wooden table, his face a mask of iron as he stares at a map that refuses to move. Outside, the world is ending. Thousands of tons of steel are being hurled across no man's land. But here, in the brain of the war machine, there is a terrifying, unnatural quiet. Pershing reaches for the telephone. He needs to move the 1st Division. He needs to call off an advance into a hidden nest of German Maxim guns. He needs to save 500 men from walking into a meat grinder. He waits. He watches the second hand on his pocket watch sweep across the dial. 10 seconds, 20, 30. On the other end of the line, a male soldier, a raw recruit from the Signal Corps, fumbles with a heavy brass plug. The boy's hands are shaking, slick with sweat and the humidity of the French autumn. He wasn't trained for the rhythmic dance of the switchboard. He was trained to march and to shoot. But now he is the gatekeeper of a billion-dollar war machine, and he is failing. It takes 60 agonizing seconds for the call to patch through. By then, the coordinated time for the charge has passed. The men have already climbed the ladders. The German shells have already found their mark. The fatal flaw of military communication has turned a command post into a mausoleum. The mechanism of this disaster is a black box of missed connections. To link 2 points on a battlefield, a soldier must manually bridge a circuit on a massive grid of electrical jacks. Think of it like a massive, pressurized water system, where every valve must be turned by hand in a perfect sequence. If a single plug is loose, the signal vanishes. If the operator stutters, the logic of the front line collapses. It is a manual process trying to keep pace with a mechanized slaughter. Pershing slams the receiver down. The most advanced army in history is being strangled by its own nervous system. He realizes a bitter truth. His soldiers are brave, but they are clumsy. They lack the specialized muscle memory of the civilian world. In the streets of New York and Chicago, calls are connected in seconds. In the trenches of France, it takes a minute for a general to tell a colonel to stop dying. Pershing doesn't need more men with rifles. He needs the snipers of the switchboard. He sends a cable back to Washington. It is a request that sends a shockwave through the War Department. He doesn't want more soldiers. He wants women. He wants bilingual professional operators who can think faster than a bullet. The response from the establishment is a chorus of dismissive laughter. The prevailing mindset of the era is a wall of crystallized arrogance. The bureaucrats claim that bringing women to the front is a logistical nightmare, a breach of decorum, and a risk to the fragile feminine psyche. One high-ranking official synthesizes the mindset of the era. We cannot trust the security of the American army to a voice that has no rank. The manual says war is for soldiers, and a soldier wears trousers. To change the system for a few girls is to admit that the system itself is broken. They prioritize the procedure of the manual over the reality of the massacre. They believe their creation is too big to fail, and that the clumsiness of their men is just a minor friction of war. But while the directors in D.C. toast to their traditions, the reality of physics is preparing a grim reminder. The high command treats the communication delay as a budget issue. They believe the ocean of blood they are shedding can be navigated with more discipline. They have fatally underestimated the boss of this conflict, the sheer, unyielding speed of modern combat. While the staff officers argue over whether women should be allowed to wear military insignia, a massive German offensive is brewing in the dark. The enemy respects no budget and no tradition. They are about to punish the American hubris with a storm of artillery aimed directly at the silence. While the system screams in panic, a woman named Grace Banker is already in the shadows, holding the silence that will save them. Grace is not a soldier. She is a supervisor at AT&T in New Jersey. She is a woman who has spent years mastering the rhythmic pulse of the American city. While the generals see a chaotic tangle of electricity, Grace sees a map of human intent. She understands that a switchboard is not a machine. It is a conversation. Her eureka moment comes not from a textbook, but from the realization that the army is trying to fight a war with one hand tied behind its back. Because she is an outsider, she sees the simplicity they missed. The army is trying to teach men to be operators. Grace knows you cannot teach a lifetime of reflexes in a 6-week boot camp. She gathers her first unit, a hand-picked group of bilingual women. They are experts, linguists, and pioneers. They are told they are civilian contractors. They are told they have no real status. They are given no weapons, only headsets. They are the hello girls. They arrive in France to find a command structure that views them with open hostility. Officers mock their uniforms. Soldiers whistle as they pass. The establishment treats them as a novelty, a temporary glitch in the masculine order. But the hammer is about to fall. The German spring offensive is launching. The lines are breaking. The 60-second delay is about to become an eternity. The dampness of the French soil has a way of soaking into everything. The wood of the switchboards, the wool of the uniforms, the very bones of the women sitting in the dark. By early 1918, the hello girls are no longer a curiosity. They are a necessity. While the infantry huddles in the mud of the 1st Army sector, Grace Banker's unit moves into the skeletal remains of bombed-out chateaus and damp bunkers. They are mere miles from the heavy German railguns, the big Berthas, that turn the horizon into a jagged line of fire. The air inside the exchange is thick with a different kind of tension. It is the sound of rhythmic clicking, the frantic dance of brass plugs against wooden panels. One evening, a major from the Signal Corps enters the exchange. He carries the weight of a man who believes he is the only one doing the real work of war. He looks at Grace, then at the row of women whose hands are moving so fast they are a blur in the dim candlelight. He clears his throat, his voice dripping with a polished, condescending authority. "Miss Banker," he says, tapping a stack of papers, "we appreciate the clerical assistance, but these lines are for high-level tactical coordination. I've seen your reports claiming connection times of under 15 seconds. That's physically impossible. My men, trained soldiers, take a minute. Perhaps your record-keeping is overly optimistic." Grace doesn't look up. Her hands are already weaving a web of copper between a field hospital and an ammunition dump. "Major," she replies, her voice as cool as the cellar air. "Your men were trained to fight. We were born to communicate. If you'd like to time us, the watch is in your pocket." The major scoffs. He pulls out his stopwatch, clicking it as a call light flickers on the board. He expects to wait. He expects to prove that the system's fatal flaw is universal. Click. The light flashes. A hand darts out. A plug is seated. A voice asks for the sector in flawless rapid-fire French. A second plug snaps into place. Click. The major looks at his watch. 10 seconds. He doesn't apologize. He simply turns and walks out, leaving the civilians to their work. He represents a system that cannot fathom a victory it didn't engineer. He sees the manual as a Bible, and the manual says a woman is a distraction. He ignores the reality right in front of his eyes. While the Army's official channels are clogged with bureaucracy, these women have become the invisible nervous system of the Great War. The technical reality of their survival is a black box of lightning-fast logic. Every switchboard is a manual exchange. To connect a call, the operator must perceive a light, identify the jack, and physically bridge the circuit. It is a game of high-stakes memory. If they miss a single digit, a barrage of friendly fire might fall on American heads. They have slashed the connection time from 60 seconds to a mere 10. This isn't just efficiency. It is a weapon. It allows the artillery to adjust their aim in real time, turning a static massacre into a fluid advance. They are the reason the Big Bertha shells are being answered with American steel. But the boss of the battlefield, the cold, indifferent physics of war, is about to demand a higher price. The German spring offensive breaks like a tidal wave. The earth begins to groan under the weight of 1,000,000 shells. In the exchanges, the women are ordered to don their gas masks. Imagine it, sitting in a dark, cramped room, the air outside poisoned with mustard gas. You are breathing through a heavy rubber hose, your vision narrowed to 2 glass circles. Your hands are shaking from the concussions of nearby explosions, but you cannot stop. You must find the jack. You must hear the voice on the other end through the roar of the guns. The command believes the women will break. They believe the feminine nerves will shatter under the pressure of the gas and the fire. The officers have already prepared the evacuation orders, certain that the operators will flee at the first sign of real danger. They have fatally underestimated their own soldiers. They treated the silence as a sign of weakness. But the silence wasn't fear, it was focus. While the generals in the rear are already packing their maps, the Hello girls are tightening their headsets. The hammer is falling. The chateau walls are cracking, and the women are the only ones left holding the line. While the artillery screams in a blind panic, Grace Banker is in the dark, holding the silence that will save them. The cross-cutting of the battlefield is a study in brutal irony. On the ridge, a lieutenant screams into a dead handset, his world collapsing as German stormtroopers crest the hill. In the bunker, 3 miles away, a hello girl is calmly rerouting a damaged line. She doesn't have a rifle. She has a pair of pliers and a headset. She is a ghost in the machine. The soldiers on the front don't know her name. They don't know she is a civilian contractor who isn't even entitled to a soldier's pay. They only know that when they pick up the phone and beg for support, a calm female voice answers. "Number, please." In that moment, the gender of the voice doesn't matter. The rank doesn't matter. Only the speed matters. The cognitive bridge that allows them to survive is their unique identity. Because they were AT&T operators, because they were outsiders to the military's rigid, slow-moving hierarchy, they possess a fluidity the Army lacks. They don't wait for a written order to fix a connection. They don't ask for permission to use their intuition. While the experts see a complex problem requiring a committee, the hello girls see a pattern that needs to be completed. They are weaving the electrical fabric of the Allied advance with a speed that renders the traditional Morse code obsolete. They have made the fatal flaw of the communication bottleneck vanish simply by being who they are. Yet, as the shells fall closer, the bitter aftertaste of their service begins to settle. They are working in the same mud as the men. They are breathing the same gas. They are sleeping in the same freezing tents. But according to the War Department, they are not soldiers. They are accidental participants. As the 1918 offensive reaches its visceral peak, the women realize that the system is happy to use their brilliance to win the war, but it is already preparing to erase their names from the peace. They are the invisible agents of change, the underdogs who turn the tide, and the very men whose lives they are saving are already writing the history books to ensure the hello girls are nothing more than a footnote. But the guns are still firing. There is no time for indignation. There is only the next light on the board, the next voice, the next life. The battle for the Meuse Argonne is about to begin. It will be the largest and bloodiest operation of the war. And as the American First Army prepares to jump off into the fog, they are tethered to life by a thin copper wire, held by a woman who officially doesn't exist. November 11th, 1918, 11 a.m. The roar that has defined the world for 4 years stops. It is a silence so heavy it feels like a physical weight. In the damp bunkers of the First Army, the hello girls do not cheer. They do not throw their headsets in the air. Their hands are still moving, vibrating with the ghost of a rhythm that has saved thousands of lives. But as the smoke clears over the Meuse Argonne, a different kind of fog begins to roll in. It is the fog of bureaucratic erasure. Grace Banker and her unit have survived the greatest artillery bombardment in human history. They have operated while their switchboards were literally on fire, refusing to leave their posts even when the walls of their exchange were crumbling. They have been the literal voice of victory. But as the troop ships begin to fill for the journey back across the Atlantic, the system, the same system that begged for their help, when it was drowning, suddenly remembers its manual. The scene unfolds in a drafty military office in post-war France. Grace Banker stands before a desk. Behind it sits a young captain, a man whose boots are polished and whose heart is a ledger of regulations. He does not look at the victory medal she was just awarded. He does not look at the exhaustion in her eyes. He looks at a form. "We need the uniforms back, Miss Banker," he says, his voice flat and devoid of the resonance of the battlefield. "And your service records. The War Department has issued a clarification. Since you are women, and since the Army has no provision for female soldiers, you are officially classified as civilian volunteers and contractors. Your service was appreciated, but it was not military." Grace stares at him. "We took the oath. We wore the insignia. We were gassed in the bunkers. My operators died for the same flag yours did." The captain offers a tight, practiced smile. It is the crystallized arrogance of an institution that has already decided the truth is too inconvenient to keep. "The regulations are clear," he replies. "A soldier is a male citizen. You were a guest of the Signal Corps. You are not entitled to a discharge. You are not entitled to a pension. And you are certainly not entitled to be called a veteran. You are simply going home." This is the cruel irony of the Great War. The very brilliance that saved the American Expeditionary Forces, the outsider status that allowed the Hello Girls to be faster, smarter, and more resilient than the men, is now the very excuse used to discard them. They were the nervous system of the war, but the body has decided it no longer needs to feel. The battle for the switchboard was won in months. The battle for the truth would take 60 years. Returning to an America that had already forgotten them, the Hello Girls found themselves in a ghost-like existence. They had seen the fire of the front, but they couldn't even walk into a VFW hall. They were denied the health care promised to soldiers. They were denied the right to be buried with a flag over their coffins. They were the invisible soldiers. The system believed they would simply fade away. They believed that time would do what the German shells could not: silence them. But the establishment forgot one thing. These women were experts in long-distance communication. They knew how to hold a line. For decades, the survivors of the Signal Corps female units lobbied Congress. They were mocked by politicians. They were told their stories were exaggerations. Each time they presented their case, the boss, the cold structural sexism of the American military, reminded them who was really in charge. It wasn't until 1977, 60 years after Pershing's desperate cable, that the silence was finally broken. President Jimmy Carter signed the legislation that finally recognized the Hello Girls as veterans. By then, only 33 of the original 223 were still alive to see it. When the news reached them, there were no parades. There was only a quiet, bitter satisfaction. They had finally connected the call, but the person on the other end had taken a lifetime to answer. The modern echo of this story is not found in the history books, but in the mirrors of our own society. We like to think we have moved past the manual. We like to believe we no longer ignore the invisible agents of our success. But do we? How many Hello Girls exist in our world today? How many specialists, outsiders, and underdogs are currently holding our systems together? While the experts in the front office take the credit, we still suffer from the same hubris that paralyzed Pershing's command. We still believe that the person with the loudest voice and the highest rank is the one doing the work. History teaches us that the massive system is always fragile. It is always one broken wire, one 60-second delay away from collapse. And when it does fall, it won't be saved by the people who wrote the regulations. It will be saved by the people the regulations ignored. The story of the Hello Girls is a reminder that the truth doesn't care about rank. It doesn't care about gender. It only cares about who stays at the post when the gas masks go on. We owe it to them to remember, not just because they won a war, but because they refused to let the silence have the last word. If you believe that stories like Grace Banker's deserve to be remembered, join our ranks by subscribing and like this video. We have synthesized this narrative from reputable historical archives and verified sources. However, the fog of war often extends to the history books. If you spot any inaccuracies or have additional details to share, please correct us in the comments. We strive for the absolute truth, and your knowledge helps us get there. Thank you for keeping history alive.